And what I've seen for the last 20, almost 20 years in practice is that the root cause of a hormone problem is almost never a hormone problem. However, it's really hard to convince some women that their hormone problems might also be related to their sluggish detoxification and sluggish digestion and all the other pieces of the puzzle. So sometimes I do just start with hormones with clients and kind of starting to dial things in and have them do maybe a metabolic reset here and there and things that can all help optimize their digestion. Then they start to notice, hey, my brain fog is clearing, or my weight is starting to drop, or I'm starting to see more body, more definition. Women like to say they like to get toned. You and I both know that that means they want to drop body fat, right? So they start to see some of those things improve, and then they become a little more motivated to kind of, okay, maybe there is a bigger picture than just hormones and, that kind of thing.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today with my guest, Dany Conway. Dany is a board-certified functional nutrition practitioner specialising in hormone optimization, metabolic health and sustainable weight loss for women 40 plus. With over 18 years of experience, she combines customised nutrition with advanced lab testing, innovative protocols and cutting-edge strategies to deliver real results. She addresses true root cause, helping thousands of clients achieve sustainable fat loss, optimal gut health and complete hormone balance. Dany doesn't just help women lose weight, she teaches them to stop starving and start living with renewed energy, confidence and metabolic health. I'm looking forward to talking all things hormones, weight loss and metabolic health in today's show. Dany, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Dany, I'm going to use a line from your website as our jumping off point because perimenopause is something that a lot of women struggle with. So I'm going to quote directly from the site. I found my purpose guiding frustrated women through a food-first approach to uncover and sustain the right customized macros and unique blend of high fat plus high protein with the right protocols that rebalances their hormones, heals their gut, helps them drop the extra weight, and tons more. Talk to us a little bit about the mistakes women historically and generally make when it comes to food, nutrition and perimenopause in general, and we'll use that as a jumping off point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see a lot of under eating in my practice. So as women, we have a history of chronic yo-yo dieting, myself included. So I was 65 pounds overweight on a fat-free diet, trying to stick with 1,200 calories and gain muscle and all of that. And that just wasn't working. So really key is the nutrition aspect. So I view that as a foundation for everything that we do. And then protein and fat are the backbones for steroid hormones, for our brain function, for our energy, cognition, all those things. So if that amount of nutrients that a woman is not eating is incorrect, then there's no way their hormones can be balanced. They're going to feel even worse in this time of life where things are already shifting and so on and so forth. So I really feel strongly about, again, that combination of protein and fat as that starting point for them, and then continuing to customize from there.
From your experience, Dany, do you find that the application, the education, or something else is what stops women applying that? So historically for me, and I work with a lot of perimenopausal women as well, it's not necessarily the education that's the issue, it's the application, because they've been doing something else for so many years and now it's not working anymore, or it's not working anywhere near as well as it did before, and it's trying to rewire their mindset so that they're taking this new approach on board. Do you find that it's less education about high fat, high protein that's the issue, and more applying it in actionable steps and changing people's mindset and women's mindset towards it? Or how does that show up in your practice?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. So, now eating more protein and more fat is a little bit more, dare I say, mainstream. It's not super mainstream, but it's more well known than it was 20 years ago when I started this. So I find that years ago, the education piece was key because I literally was finding myself having to convince women that it's okay to eat more protein, it's okay to eat more fat. These are the nutrients that feed your hormones. Now I feel like it's a little bit of how we're programmed through the diet culture to eat less, weigh less, when really a lot of times we actually have to eat more to weigh less. So it's definitely shifted from education to mindset, or I like to say mind shift, where we have to really shift the mind to realizing that these are the foods that are going to feed our bodies, and then go from there to be able to continue to balance hormones and all the things that kind of fall into place after that.
I know you're very similar to me, where it's not a one size fits all, and I'll link your option for coaching and the weight loss accelerator for people in the bottom as well, so they can see it in the description. But out of curiosity, as a best practice, how do you design out the nutritional protocol for a perimenopausal woman looking to lose weight? Is it fat and protein in the major meals with high protein, high fat snacks in between? Is there a fasting protocol in there? Is there a strategic refeed with carbohydrates at any point to help them sustain? Or again, and I know it's not a one size fits all, and what I love about your coaching is you don't apply one thing to everybody. It's like, okay, different people respond to different things. We sing from very similar hymn sheets there. But as a best practice for those listening, what would be a typical layout for a nutritional plan?
So, as far as protein goes, this is a very, like we both said, this is a general recommendation. So, I do find that having women do 2 to 3 meals a day at 30 to 40 grams of protein per meal, targeting approximately their ideal body weight in macronutrient grams of protein. That's a starting point. From there, at least the same amount of fat, and then looking at what they do best with as far as carbohydrates. So I work with women on a spectrum of low carb through carnivore, like meat only type approach, and then kind of dialing that in from, as far as like where they would fall on the spectrum. Now, in terms of fasting, I think fasting is amazing. I think it's a great lever to pull, but there's two things that I want to mention on that. Number one, it's never something that should be used for weight loss. So this is where I think a lot of women fail, is that they think, "Oh, I have to lose weight, so I'm just going to fast." That will backfire and screw up their hormones even more. So my approach to fasting is what I call fueling before fasting. And this means that we have to dial in what they should be doing in their eating window before they can start any fasting. And that's not for a day or a week. That's typically sometimes 2 to 3 months, where they really, really hone in on their metabolism, all the other things that go into weight loss, the resistance training, the exercise, the sleep, all of that. Once everything is dialed, once they're getting what they need in that eating window, then they can start extending their fasting window. And then also subsequently, as far as like meals and snacks, so what I also find is that if women are getting what they need for their meals and the right balance of protein, fat, and carbs, if they're eating carbs, they don't need to be snacking 3 times a day. And that gives their digestion a break. They stop dripping food into their system. Their insulin can re regulate, their blood sugar can re regulate, their leptin and ghrelin can re regulate. So, all those things are important pieces of the puzzle as well.
Dany, you mentioned ghrelin, leptin, insulin there. When it comes to hormone optimization, because I love, well, actually, one of my favorite clientels to work with is females in the perimenopausal space in particular, because I think it's like a jigsaw piece that needs to be solved, because there's
100%.
so many different moving parts, and it's a beautiful experience to work with somebody through. But something that I've had to educate a lot of women myself, and I suppose my own professional coaching as well as working with them, when it comes to hormone misconceptions, because sometimes, and this might be different in your world, but feel free to add in and chime in if it is the same, that they'll go, hormones are the problem. If I can just balance my hormones, everything else will fix itself. And that is partly dangerous in my experience, because it's partly true. It will make everything else feel easier if you can regulate your hormones, especially during this season of life. When it comes to hormones in perimenopause in particular, and menopause, all that way through that spectrum, what's the biggest misconception you tend to see, or the thought process that you would like to shift and change that's very unsupportive for most women?
Yeah, so I think that you're right. Women think that if their hormones are balanced, that's going to fix everything. So, what I actually see, so when I was originally trained in functional medicine almost 20 years ago, that's exactly how I learned: fix their hormones, then fix their gut, then fix their detoxification systems. And then that worked until somewhere along the way, about probably 12 years ago, it stopped working as well. And at that point in time, I really had to, because I'm kind of obsessed with continuing my education and really kind of watching things evolve and all of that. So, with that being said, I started to work with women on their digestion and detoxification systems first. So, really optimizing their gut health, making sure that they weren't holding on to toxins that are stored in fat, all that kind of stuff. What I started to see is that if we work on their gut and their detox systems first, their hormones naturally rebalance. Now, they might not rebalance 100%, but I actually see improvements on their hormone lab work if I don't even technically touch their hormones, work on gut and detox first, retest their hormones improve, then we can get that much more improvement when we technically work on their hormones. So I would say that's a big misconception that people don't even think about is how much their gut and their liver detox systems, sluggish liver, sluggish digestion, affect their hormone balance in the big scheme of things. And I'm all for bioidentical replacement if it's right for that individual woman. But if someone goes directly to that remedy, so to speak, I see that fail probably 80 to 90% of the time because the other stuff wasn't either worked on first or the prescribing doctor or practitioner, especially in perimenopause, they just go based on symptoms. They don't actually test hormones. And to say that you cannot test hormones in perimenopause is a bunch of BS. You absolutely can. You have to be more strategic about it for sure, but there are ways around quote unquote perimenopause and changing hormones in order to test successfully to get that woman, optimized in the best way possible.
I'm going to come back because I've heard you say regularly test, don't guess.
Mhm.
And that's the role that functional lab testing plays. So I will come back about how to test those hormones. I'll open that loop for people and we'll close it shortly. But before we do, I want to focus on the gut because something else I've came across on your content, singing from an identical hymn sheet as me, is peptides, BPC 157, and the gut healing aspect of that particular peptide.
Yeah.
Before we talk about BPC 157, which is the one that comes up most often as a recommendation through your content, and I love it as someone who had a history of IBS and issues with my gut, it is transformative in terms of, and I found it by accident. I started taking it because of I dislocated my knee and I was taking it to repair faster from the injury. And the side benefit was, oh my God, my stomach feels the best it's felt in years. And then I went down, checked. It was incredible the way it came across. But before we get into peptides, BPC 157, and then we'll come back to how to test for the hormones, when it comes to gut health in general, what's the biggest mistake you see women making? And I'm very always curious to ask an expert on this, and this is your wheelhouse, because sometimes it's a omission that they're not eating enough of what they need with their prebiotics. Sometimes it's not looking at the underlying issues. It's lifestyle and stress. It's a hormonal imbalance elsewhere that's having a negative impact on the gut. It's the food. It's a whole host. And I love the gut because it is the most multi-layered angle of any topic I think I could cover on the podcast. So when you think of gut mistakes that the average perimenopausal woman is making, what comes to mind?
So I love this question. And I love that you brought up BPC because yes, it is one of my favorite peptides. That being said, total unpopular opinion is that if someone just goes right to a peptide or right to a supplement and expects that thing to solve all of their problems, they are going to be very, very disappointed. So, foundation first, food first, dialing in again, the not to, keep repeating this, but getting their food right, getting the right balance of foods, making sure that they're, if they tolerate, some maybe fermented foods, things like that, just depending again for me and my clientele, like where they fall on the spectrum of what nutrients and what macros they need. But really, sleep plays a huge role with gut health and repair. So that's a big thing too. So the biggest myth or misconception or mistake I would say is just going to the supplements or going to the peptides and expect them to do miracles without addressing the foundational pieces first. And I think that certainly someone can go there and they can definitely help. But in the big scheme of things, you know, I think that we have to make sure that we're not just relying on the supplement or the peptide to do the heavy lifting, so to speak, for us. And I would say That's the biggest like mistake that I see.
I'm going to ask you a horrible gut health question now, but I'm going to give you a minute to think about it because I would hate to be asked this question. So I apologize, but I feel like you'll possibly be able to answer it when it comes to if you could only do one thing for your gut, what would it be? And I'll give you a minute to think about that because I just want to say when we're talking about BPC, body protective compound 157, there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast in Ireland and the UK, and I'm not sure if it's the same in the US. I think this is actually better regulated. It's actually one of the few things where the US is considerably better regulated than the EU. Over here, we have what's called bathtub peptides. It's people making them in their bathtub and selling them. So getting it from a reputable source, and this is my call to action. I'm not saying to go out and get peptide. You may not need it, but in Ireland and the UK in particular, there's a lot of websites and a lot of places that sell them, and they are not regulated. And if you are, make sure that there's a certificate of analysis, that you know what laboratory it's coming from, you know what's in it, because a lot of people will go, oh, amazing, it's, half the price on this website. It's like, that's because John made it in his bathtub and is now selling it online. So just, I wanted to clarify that just for everyone that's listening. Back to gut health. And again, horrible question. I apologize in advance. But if there was one thing that more often than not, assuming that people are going to take the food first approach or the lifestyle based first approach when it comes to sleep or some other angle, what's the one thing that you'd recommend the majority of women listening should consider when it comes to their gut health, or something that they could actionably implement?
I would say that if we're talking about the foundational pieces being in place and maybe we don't have any fancy testing to see what's actually going on, I would actually implement something that I call a metabolic reset with bone broth. And so that is, looking at doing a bone broth fast essentially, maybe some protein added depending on how compromised their gut is, but 24, 48, 60 hours bone broth fast where they're consuming bone broth and electrolytes and really giving their gut a break from overall digestion. That can be an incredible tool for gut healing. Someone can do that weekly, someone can do that monthly. You don't have to buy fancy supplements to do that. You can make your own bone broth. So I like to do a lot of those types of strategies where they're not reliant on, yeah, certainly BPC is fancy and effective. And I could name a whole long list of gut health supplements that are great for gut healing. But, that it's rich in collagen, you've got minerals, you've got nutrients, you've got very, very soothing properties for gut health and for leaky gut. I would say that given all the other foundational pieces in place, that's something that almost anyone can do, provided they have access to bone broth.
Can I ask a question? This is a focus group of one selfish question with the hopes that there's a few hundred, possibly thousands that are listening with a similar thought process. I'm a big fan of bone broth. I absolutely love it. But I have quite a sensitive stomach, and if I consume too much bone broth, it actually does the reverse for me. My stomach starts to swell, I get bloated, I don't feel that good. Is that a common, or is that a consideration for some individuals if they were doing something like a metabolic reset with bone broth, but their body's not quite taking to it? Is it a case of pushing through it until you're getting that healing through the gut lining by consuming it, or is it a case of scaling back and having like a hybrid metabolic reset with something else? Or what would be the protocol for that if there was somebody listening who's in a similar position?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So I would go with a hybrid protocol. So I would not have them push through. So anytime I make a recommendation for someone, even if it's more general, if they're miserable and if it's causing more symptoms, while it could be a detox or it could be a die-off reaction, I actually don't want their symptoms to get worse for a long period of time before they get better. So someone could evaluate individually if they did want to push through and see what happens, of course. But with that being said, I would go with a hybrid where maybe they have one meal a day that's bone broth with added meat. And then the other meal or the other two meals is a very light, not very many spices, something that's super easy on digestion. Perhaps they tolerate eggs, so maybe scrambled eggs, something like that, since the whole goal is to give the gut a break. I'm not saying to live off of bone broth and scrambled eggs forever because I'd be really hungry if that was the case. So I think to answer your question, it's a hybrid and then looking at, getting further into like, okay, so why am I reacting to bone broth? Is it a histamine response? Is it something else that's still going on in the gut? Maybe it is partially just needing to heal the gut longer. and so on and so forth.
Amazing. That's fantastic advice, because I know there'll be a few people off the back of this podcast, myself included, who'd be considering that metabolic reset, just because even for, autophagy reasons, longevity reasons, digestive reasons, just kind of giving your digestive system a break, it's nice to incorporate these things as we go along. Which brings me back to test, don't guess. With functional lab testing, and I will come into hormones, but I want to park on the gut first, because you mentioned there about offering advice outside of having results from a lab in front of you, or paraphrasing it slightly, but not having the data. If you were working with an individual and they had access to the functional lab testing and the gut was the priority, what would be the things you would test for first?
So I do like to, this is a loaded question actually.
Worse than the last one. I'll just throw them right at you. I've just, for give people context, I haven't prepared Dani with anything, so she's answering everything off the cuff. So this shows you how clued in and expert she is in her area.
Yeah, well, these are all my favorite topics. So, all right. So, with that said, I would say I do like to do a combination of tests because no one lab test is ever foolproof. So, there's always going to be a margin of error. So, when I look at the gut, quote unquote, I'm looking, of course, stool testing is going to be key for bacterial levels, for immune function, for enzyme production, things like that. I'm also looking at comprehensive blood work to see inflammatory markers, other clues into the gut. I'm also looking at hormones because hormones and gut are connected. So the whole, mold, mycotoxins, environmental toxins, also testing for those things. So all of those little pieces of the puzzle are the best ways for me to then look for patterns and to put the clues together so that I can then correlate that back to the person who especially has said, "Oh, my doctor has said on my lab results are normal." Well, I'm always looking for optimal, not normal. So we don't want to be normal because the whole population is normal. The sick population is normal because that's what they base those test ranges on. So we want optimal. Optimal is a much smaller range as far as the results go and those lab markers. And we want to know if we're outside of optimal but within normal. How do we get back into balance into that optimal range? So that's a long answer to your question, but correlating multiple things to look at, gut health or whatever the case is.
You do the same then in terms of, I think would the answer be identical if you were testing for hormones? It'd be a case of having the blood panels, having all the gut, having the hormonal test, and then looking at it like a jigsaw piece so that all the pieces are together and it's just about putting the picture together. Is that what you would approach for someone who is coming primarily with an issue with hormones as well?
So, yes, and it's a little more complicated sometimes because while my belief and what I've seen for the last 20, almost 20 years in practice is that the root cause of a hormone problem is almost never a hormone problem. However, it's really hard to convince some women that their hormone problems might also be related to their sluggish detoxification and sluggish digestion and all the other pieces of the puzzle. So sometimes I do just start with hormones with clients and kind of starting to dial things in and have them do maybe a metabolic reset here and there and things that can all help optimize their digestion. Then they start to notice, hey, my brain fog is clearing, or my weight is starting to drop, or I'm starting to see more body, more definition. Women like to say they like to get toned. You and I both know that that means they want to drop body fat, right? So they start to see some of those things improve, and then they become a little more motivated to kind of, okay, maybe there is a bigger picture than just hormones and, that kind of thing.
It's a great answer. And it's interesting, as you mentioned there, toning up. And I always try and educate the audience that that's just reducing body fat and showing the lean muscle tissue that's underneath. And training and the movement element, something I'm going to come back to shortly, is my area of expertise within this, because I think it's fascinating what happens to the hormonal system, particularly in perimenopause, when you're getting that decrease in insulin sensitivity alongside potential hormonal issues with cortisol, and having the correct training protocol. Because with women, and we'll practice, because I want to ask about the detoxification protocol on top of something like a metabolic reset. But with the training side, it's very interesting, because the language I hear, and it might be similar with you, Dani, is, a 42, 43, 44, 45-year-old woman who's like, what I did 10 years ago isn't working anymore. Like, I was able to go for a run. I could go on the cross trainer and I could drop the weight and I would tighten up my diet for a few weeks and the excess body fat would drop before holidays, and that's not working anymore. And I think that's fascinating because it just shows that, again, it's different seasons of life, different horses for courses is what I tell them. Different season of life, you need new tools in your arsenal for now, and that's where your heavy lifts come in. That's where your high intensity interval training comes in, because of the potential increase in insulin sensitivity, which you need, the balancing of cortisol, the increase in bone density, the increase in metabolic health from the training side. So you're covering all angles on this. And then to bring that back, and I will ask about movement shortly, as I mentioned, the detoxification protocol. If you were trying to amplify that with an individual, assuming that they were following some form of the metabolic reset, either with the bone broth or a hybrid with their own nutrition, how would you amplify that? Do you have, is it supplements, sauna, different tools that you like to include, or what would a protocol look like for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes to the supplements, but even if someone that's not my also not my first go-to. So we want to make sure that they're detoxing properly, they're pooping regularly, they're, all keeping their drainage pathways open. So I have, the strategies that I like to recommend for that are like Epsom salt baths, sea salt baths, infrared sauna if they have access to that, castor oil packs where they're, supporting your liver, gallbladder when they go wearing those to sleep at night, but that also stimulates their parasympathetic nervous system. So it can help with their resting and digesting, self-lymphatic drainage. So there's points for our lymphatic system by our collarbones, armpits, belly, groin area. So really doing those types of dry brushing is another one where a lot of people think that dry brushing is super woo woo and how can that ever work? But it does. It helps with circulation and it can help with lymphatic drainage. And when you get into a routine of doing those things a couple times a week and alternating, vibration plate is another one that I love, and sort of alternating through those, they s the consistency of doing that on a schedule regularly without getting overwhelmed, feeling like you have to do every single strategy every single day, that is key. Again, those are the long-term things that someone can implement, and then when you add supplements or liver support and binders, and I do that with, like, the protocols in my practice depending on what's going on for them, those things work even better, but you can't just expect to add supplements and then not open up their drainage pathways or not have them be really working on sweating and doing those things that are, naturally quote unquote detoxing without, not having benefit.
I find it fascinating still to this day, and I'm not working in the space as long as you, but have been for 12, 13 years. The amount of people who follow their own version of a detoxification protocol, but then don't have a tracking of their bowel movements, don't have tracking of their sweating. And as soon as you put the question back, what, how do you think you're getting it out? Like it has to come. Detox means it's getting out of your system. And the amount of people who got this penny drop aha moment that go, oh crap, I didn't think about that. So again, that's just a check-in for people, which ties in slightly to the next question. Outside of supplements, because when somebody asks me what's the most overrated thing when it comes to weight loss, fat loss, supplements have a role. Caffeine will help, L-carnitine potentially, green tea extract with BCGC is high enough and potentially promoting and enhancing metabolic health. But they're the last 1%, and I'm being generous with my last 1% here, because of your sleep, your stress, your nutrition, your movement, etc. When you think of overrated things for detox, particularly that's non-supplement based, what comes to mind?
Juice cleanses, you know, detox, any type of thing that's marketed as like a detox cleanse or a juice cleanse. So someone will get so much more benefit from an Epsom salt bath, a castor oil pack, dry brushing, and doing those things that I just mentioned regularly than they will from a juice cleanse. And that's not to say that maybe there's a percentage of people out there that benefit from that. I never did. I actually felt terrible when I would try to do those things years ago. I think that that's the most overrated thing as far as detox goes. And then the other thing I would mention is there's a camp of people out there that say, you don't need to do a detox. That's what your body does on its own. It's like, well, the liver does become sluggish. The digestion does become sluggish. We do store toxins. We are exposed to toxins. So my goals with clients, like, we're never going to get rid of all the toxins in the environment or, wherever we are, so to speak. But if we can get our immune system and our detoxification systems functioning better on a daily basis, that is part of what will lead to longevity and vitality over a longer period of time. Of course, the weight loss, the fat loss, everything in between, the building muscle, body composition, all of that for sure, working on metabolic health overall. But those things will definitely, the immune system and detoxification system will help us to be able to, go into a building that might have a little bit of mold in it and not have a reaction for 5 days after entering that building or whatever the factor is for that individual person.
This is a how long is a piece of string question, I know, before I even ask it, but I'll use best practice as the undertone for it. In terms of detoxification and how many times a year somebody should consider this, and I know it depends on their starting point, it depends on their season of life, it depends on if they've been exposed to mold, it depends on if they've been traveling. There's a lot of different variables, but for the regular person who goes on maybe 1 or 2 holidays a year, who is, in a season of life that we've spoken about here between 35, 45, maybe up to 50 and beyond, if they were thinking about detoxing, particularly now, this podcast will be going out in November before January, because that's when people tend to do their detox after a silly season of too much at Christmas. What would be the optimal amount of time for the average person to consider a full-blown detox in terms of maybe multiple weeks, potentially a couple of months, like you mentioned earlier, for the metabolic reset or the fasting protocol if somebody needed it, versus kind of mini detoxes? So the way I've always done it is I kind of listen to my body, because there's times when I'm like, I came back from Kyrgyzstan in 2023, I picked up a parasite, I had to clear that, and I had to do a full detox after because I felt like somebody else was operating my body. My energy was low, I was sluggish, I felt horrible even after I had cleared the parasite. And now I just do kind of mini detoxes as we go along that are just, mini fasting protocols, extra sauna, Epsom salt baths, like you've mentioned. They're all part of my implementation strategy as well. But for the average person listening, what would be a good approach or consideration for how long they should potentially consider detoxing throughout the year?
So it's a great question. And here's how I see it. If someone takes the strategies that we've been talking about and implements those on a monthly schedule, let's just say dry brushes a few times a week, and on other weeks they do Epsom salt baths, and if they had access to an infrared sauna, I don't necessarily think that someone has to get into this space of like, I have to do this major detox because their system is already working better on a daily basis. So they're not going to need to do this intense detox protocol. Now, you get exposed to something, you have a few extra treats at Christmas time, something like that. Yes, the following week or so, do an extra sauna session, do an extra, Epsom salt bath, get an extra workout or two in. But I also don't like to sort of like use those things on a we both work with women, so I'm going to use this term you're going to understand, like on a binge and restrict cycle where we do all the things and it's all or then it's all the things and then it's nothing, right? So not only do we have to rebalance our approach to food from a lot of women that come from that overeating and undereating cycle, but I think that goes to like all of these fancy protocols from supplements to peptides to detox strategies. And if you cycle all of those things properly as part of a good quality innovative protocol, then you don't have to spend a week killing yourself in an infrared sauna for an hour a day because you had two Christmas meals that maybe were off plan or something like that.
Beautiful advice. Absolutely beautiful advice, and couldn't agree more. Dani, I want to pull it back to the peptides just because I think, and I'm going to link your website, I'm going to link the YouTube, the Instagram, everywhere below so people can go check out and follow on more of your stuff, particularly your Instagram page. There's some phenomenal research on there and some of the things that you've worked on and people you've supported over the years. But peptides are a very interesting topic because I kind of felt when I came across them first that it was BPC 157 that got me in. It's the primary one that I've used, have the most experience with as somebody with a history of gut issues, but also as someone that's an athlete and has been playing sport and does marathons and different races. Injury, speeding up injury whenever there's inflammation within an injury is very high up on my list. So I'm a big fan of this. But for those who are in the perimenopausal space, outside of BPC 157, which can be taken orally or can be taken as an injectable with a syringe, depending on protocol that you want to take it in, what are some of your favorite peptides for assuming nutrition, training, sleep, stress, the foundation pillars are good, they're strong. What would you consider as the next peptide outside of BPC 157 for females in particular to consider within that perimenopausal range?
Absolutely. So I actually love approaching peptides with the cellular health aspect. So a lot of people go to peptides and they think fat loss, they think weight loss. Gut health, of course, BPC is one of the most common. But my approach after, maybe something like BPC and even before in some cases is like a SS31 cellular health peptide, potentially MOTS-C if they're dealing with some more metabolic issues, because everything comes down to cellular health. That's where our energy comes from, our mitochondria. All of those things have to be in a good, healthy range, so to speak. Then, sometimes looking at something like epitalon or, there are other weight loss and fat loss compounds that are, like I like to say, non-GLP based because not everyone is interested in those types of peptides, which is great and to all fine. But I see a lot of benefit, again, cellular health peptides, some metabolic health peptides, and then I would say like a KPV, like an anti-inflammatory, still goes back to gut health kind of approach after that. And it also depends on, like you say, do they just want to take it orally? Not everyone's willing to inject themselves, and that's all fine. Then I might go to, then we have to look at what is available orally, what's effective. So there's a lot of controversy over oral peptides, but what I can say in clinical practice is I have clients who have taken oral peptides and had benefit from using them. So as much as then somebody wants to say like oral peptides don't work, maybe not for some people, but I have absolutely seen them work in many, many scenarios.
Yeah, BPC in particular because of the gut aspect. Now, interestingly enough, and the research is kind of funny on peptides because it's still kind of relatively new in terms of the US are pioneering this. It's really, really good in terms of the modern research. And then anything that comes from the 80s and 90s is from Russia. So it's hard to kind of decipher it. But the BPC 157, for those who are taking it for injury, generally closer to the site because it's non-systemic as far as I know, in terms of if you hurt your knee, the oral is not really going to help it. It's going to help your gut lining and the gastroprotectoral element of it. But if you've torn a meniscus, you probably need to use an injectable closer to the site region. So I'll just add that just so there's lack of confusion for people, because I'm a big fan of TB500 as well. TB500.
Yeah, I was actually
Oh,
just going to mention the TB500. So I will say though, now a torn meniscus, I agree, as close as someone could get to the site without injecting into a joint, because nobody that's not people that aren't qualified should not be injecting into joints. We should just clarify that right now.
I'm so glad you said that. I forgot to say that. I'm so glad you said that.
That's
Yes.
okay. So with that being said, I actually have had clients who have used oral BPC and still had improvements in joint health. So it does happen. Again, like we're talking about, in a perfect world, someone would be injecting systemically close to that area subcutaneously. But I do see people benefit still from oral BPC in their joint health.
That's good. Can you explain TB500 for people? Because this is, interestingly, BPC 157 and TB500 are the two I have the most experience with personally, anecdotally, and I've recommended it for a few clients. What's interesting is we get pushback when I put this on social media because people are like, it's banned by WADA. And I'm like, I'm not promoting BPC 157 or TB500 for Olympic athletes. I'm talking about the person who's got a torn muscle, who's got 3 kids at home, a job, and they can't be on crutches for multiple weeks. And if you can speed it up, so just to kind of give a little bit of a context, but can you explain the benefits and the reasons why you're a fan of TB500 in particular? Because those two are by far the ones I have the most experience with and the ones I like the most. But again, I'm biased based on personal experience.
Sure. So I like TB500. So TB500 is kind of like an overall anti-inflammatory. So it's going to target, dare I say, like inflammation. It could be systemic inflammation or it could be inflammation localized in that area. So the properties of BPC and TB500 together, working to lower inflammation, bring more blood circulation to that area to heal the injury. Those two, they work great together.
Love it, and a big fan of them personally. Interestingly, as a supplement, it was the only one I noticed with things like my hair, my skin, nails. Very interesting that I noticed a difference in that. And I imagine it's just in cellular inflammation, I would guess. Again, I don't know. I haven't done the test on this, but it was very noticeable on top of the reduced inflammation. And like, I train multiple times a week, high level training for races and things along those lines. And I did notice that just the everyday soreness was massively reduced. So as a performance enhancer, it can work great, but that's not where I recommend using it. I recommend using it if you have kids at home and you've got an injury that's debilitating and you need a little bit of support with that. You've torn a muscle and you have to go off work for a week. This is where I think these are just educating people. I'm not recommending, don't use anything without a prescription. Talk to Dani, talk to me, talk to other coaches online potentially who are schooled in this area. But it's, I think, information and having the education and awareness for people is what's important. Dani, I just got one final question that I want to ask, and it's going to be within the mindset space for what holds people back and the thing that separates successful clients from non-successful clients. And I have a professional curiosity to ask this question as well, because it's always adding to my repertoire as a coach. But before I do that, the website I'm going to link below, the Instagram I'm going to link below. Is there anywhere else in particular you'd like to send people off the back of this podcast before we get into the final question?
Yeah, I will just say I love to answer questions in my Instagram stories, so I do that a lot. Really try to give a lot of value. I have my quarterly, few times a year weight loss accelerator program that I run that's online. So I have a lot of international clients come join me there, as well as my monthly wellness collective community. It's a private community off of social media. Again, I have a lot of women within the US and outside of the US. We deep dive on everything beyond nutrition. So of course, nutrition, but also hormones and peptides and gut health and detoxification. And really, my sort of goal and how I got part of how I got started, aside from my own story, is demystifying a lot of the misinformation out there and really clarifying so people can understand like what really they should be doing next and upgrading, of course, what you're doing and, next level results. So those are my focuses and those are my areas where I like to hang out and whatnot. So happy to take a mindset question.
Amazing. And I'll link that in the show notes for everybody. And those that are listening, demystifying is such an important thing. It's my focus with the podcast. It's Dani's focus online. You're probably thinking of a family member or friend, probably someone in the perimenopausal space that you're like, actually, they would really benefit from this podcast. So please send it to them. Take a screenshot, pop it to them on WhatsApp, or pop it up on any group that you're in where you've got multiple women that could benefit from this conversation. That will help massively. Hopefully it will help massively if they're in a position to hear it, because sometimes we have to meet people where they're at. So anyone that comes to mind, please send them the podcast. Dani, last question. As I mentioned, I always think, and I use myself as an example, the mindset difference between successful clients and, I would say, unsuccessful results. I wouldn't say unsuccessful clients, because I don't want to label people with their actions, because
Sure.
sometimes it's just season of life, or something else happens and they're not able to execute for a whole host of reasons. But from your experience, when it comes to the mindset side, particularly with perimenopausal women, what do you see is the difference that separates the successful clients, the ones who apply what you're teaching them, apply all the tools that you've given them, get the results, and can continue and sustain it? I think that's the real secret sauce to what you're doing here. Very similar to me. It's not, here's your program for 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 18 weeks, bang, crazy results, and then boom, rebound out the other side. It's, here's the results, here's how you sustain, here's how you pull the lever back, here's how you accelerate forward, so on and so forth. What do you see in terms of the mindset shift that separates the successful clients from those who aren't able to stick to it or who don't get the results over the long term?
So I think that one of the biggest things that's going to make a difference with that mindset, or like I said earlier, that mind shift is number one. Okay, so maybe there's two things. The belief that what they're doing is going to work, number one. With that being said, with that belief, they have to be willing to let go of their old story. So the more times that we tell the old story of this is happening to me and that's happening to me, and I've been trying to lose weight for 2 years and it keeps on, and I gain weight and my hormones and all these things are going awry, and we continue to tell the story. As long as you continue to tell that story, this is so woo woo, but the body hears everything the mind says. So if you don't flip that script, if that woman doesn't flip that script and start to, and even if it's starting with, like I like to say, fake it till you make it, even if you don't believe all of it right away, just start somewhere. because eventually you'll start believing it. And you need to tell the new story. You need to tell your body a new story. We need to tell our minds a new story. Again, the more you repeat all the things that we've been living with in that old story, the more your body hears it. So recreate the new story, reprogram your cells, go to sleep at night with your new story, not your old story. For example, we go to bed at night, we think, as women, we worry a lot. My autoimmune, my doctor said this, they don't have answers for me, and I can't lose the weight. You go to sleep, you're now programming all of that repetitively into your cells, going to sleep at night. You wake up in the morning, what are we thinking about? All the things that we reprogrammed continuously into our cells the night before. So at nighttime, start with maybe a gratitude list, a journal entry. And this doesn't have to be 5 paragraphs. This can be like 3 things on a little post-it note of paper. But change your mind, shift your mind before you go to sleep at night so your trajectory changes, your body starts hearing you differently, you start believing differently, and that's what's going to lead to long-term results.
Beautiful, beautiful way to wrap up, Dany. And I couldn't agree more. I've had some of the world's leading psychologists and psychotherapists on the podcast who will talk about that mind body connection. And I've had trauma experts, individuals who work in somatic therapy, who talk about the body mind connection and how the whole thing is linked. And what you said there was a perfect synopsis and rounding it up, that you need to change that story, you need to change that narrative and shift that mindset, because that ultimately is what's going to work all the way down to a cellular level, all the way up to the conscious thought and the subconscious mind when you're sleeping. Absolutely love that to wrap. Dany, keep doing what you're doing. Tremendous content online. Great conversation here today. I'm very grateful for it. And thank you so much again.
Absolutely, Brian. Thanks so much for having me.
That was metabolic health expert Dany Conway on navigating perimenopause, sustainable weight loss, and safely using peptides during hormonal challenges. I love this podcast. I literally would talk all these topics all day long. So hopefully you got as much benefit from it as I got enjoyment from recording it. Just a reminder, today's show was sponsored by my perimenopause program. If you are looking to work with me on that journey, particularly with the training and nutrition side, it could be a great fit. But also, as I mentioned in the introduction, Dany works with people individually, one-to-one, and in her Fat Loss Accelerator. So square pegs into square holes. This podcast is all about bringing the coaches and people to you who you think will be the best fit for you. So maybe check out both, see what's a better fit. That's everything from me from today's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Catch you next Monday.